everyone. I am super happy to have a conversation today with Kyle Grady, Assistant Professor of English at UCI. Kyle arrived here at UCI last year, and what a year it has been. Kyle, your research considers representations of race, blackness, and racial mixing in Shakespeare and early modern drama. And you draw in part from African American studies to pursue these questions. Can you just tell us a little bit about your research?
Yeah, so one of the things that early modern race studies and pre-modern race studies in general has been working for a while to begin to do is sketch out longer histories, try to connect earlier periods to a longer history that we in our own moment are a part of. One of the things I try and think about in my research are issues of race that are especially complex today. Essentially, issues of race that we really may not have figured out today, and there are a fair amount of those. Racial mixing is probably a really good example of that. And so today, we often think about racial mixing as new, or a sort of 21st century phenomenon, or potentially a sort of indication that we're in a post-racial society. But of course, racial mixing is actually very old. And we have thinkers like Frederick Douglass working through problems that, and working through issues related to racial mixing that we imagine to be 21st century questions. And so part of what I try and do in my research is think about how studying that long history can help us approach, for example, a play like Shakespeare's Titus Andronicus, which is also offers complex representations of racial mixing. And so in thinking through this longer history, I try and better situate early modern England into it, and also try and better explicate the nuances that we see operating in those plays.
That's great, such important work. Can you tell our listeners what you think the most important misconceptions are out there about Shakespeare and Race?
Yeah, so, this is I'm thinking about this, and I think there are a number. I think probably the biggest one is that studying race in Shakespeare is in some sense new. And in fact, the field has a sort of a longer history. And you can look to, for example, the work of someone like Professor Kim Hall, whose monograph, Things of Darkness, continues to push forward the field, and in fact anticipates a lot of the questions that I think the field of early modern studies is now currently grappling with. It remains an incredibly important and present book, and it came out in the 90s. I guess another misconception would be that Shakespeare is somehow inoculated or rather sort of insulated from being racist, or that early modern culture is incapable of racism. And that's actually, of course, not true at all. There are a lot of unambiguously racist representations in Shakespeare and in early modern drama. And so that's actually connected to another misconception. And this is one that I work through in my classrooms a lot. And that misconception is that if we talk about the racism of that culture or in those plays, that somehow stands to sort of harm Shakespeare studies or the legacy of Shakespeare. And I think, the reality is that Shakespeare offers us an opportunity both to grapple with the value inherent to those plays, the sort of incredible cultural value of those plays, and also be honest with ourselves about the racism inherent to that culture and inherent in those plays. And, one of the things I try and do in my classrooms is remind my students that if we can be honest with ourselves about what's happening in those plays, we can then perhaps be more honest with ourselves about what's happening in the world around us, which is to say, to understand that with the good, there is bad, and to understand that, that even though there are positive and incredibly valuable aspects to culture that we need to hold on to and value, that there are also problems inherent to culture that we need to face.
Oh, that's really beautifully put. So do you see your approach to teaching or research being reshaped or refocused in any way by the recent protests? what do you see as the next steps for the hashtag Shake Race or the hashtag Race Before Race conversations that you've been a part of?
Yeah, so that's a great question. I think one of the things I would say is, you know, I would encourage people to actually pursue those hashtags and see the conversations that are being driven there. You know, Race Before Race, for example, is a much broader set of conversations that, you know, that was before our pandemic taking place in person. You know, that's being led by Ayanna Thompson, you know, who's another scholar whose work I think is you know, sort of absolutely essential to kind of check into if you're curious about these conversations. And Race Before Race, in a lot of ways, has been a venue to discuss a lot of the issues that the protests are raising. And so, one of the things about Shakespeare and race studies is that these conversations about the persistence of racial violence, these conversations have been happening in Race Before Race. The last meeting that took place, the last conference, Race Before Race, that took place dealt with these issues, as did the one before it. And these preceded the protests. And you know, one of the things I would encourage anyone interested in sort of critical studies of race to sort of quote Margot Hendricks, who opened one of these conversations, one of these broader conferences. Anyone interested in these critical conversations of race can check into Race Before Race to see the ways in which the field, in so much as it's engaged with critical race studies, has really been putting forward a message of anti-racism, you know, for a very long time.
Oh, that's really great. We're so happy to have you at UCI as part of our faculty and part of our Shakespeare Center. And we really look forward to continuing to learn with you and from you in the years to come. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Delighted.